All right. Tracy's not coming, I'm assuming, right?
She'll be late.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll take the roll call.
Terrific. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, June 16th, 2022 Ordinance Committee meeting. And with that, Liam's going to help us with attendance.
Sure. Counselor Katarina,
Here.
Counselor Clucci,
Here.
Counselor Hamel.
Here. Thanks, everyone. If you've had a chance to read the minutes, I'd like to take a motion to approve those. If you haven't had a chance to read them, we'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of walk through them. Is everybody okay to go ahead? Okay. And do I have a second? Okay.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel.
Yes. We have one slight change to the agenda this evening. Our first item of business will be a discussion of the utility scale solar ordinance. And joining us this evening is Jamie Fitch, who is our sustainability coordinator for the vast dominion of the town of Scarborough. So welcome.
Thank you.
And thanks very much for, you gave us some stuff ahead of time, a nice memo and some great work on that. So with that, if you would be so kind as to give us background and walk us through that, we'll be happy to go through this with you. Thank you.
Sure. So if you recall, or the council passed our solar ordinance back in the fall. We have received 4 applications since that came in. 2 of them were approved and 2 of them were withdrawn because they could not meet the forestry standard that was in the original ordinance, which basically said that no trees could be removed to install solar arrays, which is the only ordinance or only section of our zoning ordinance that does restrict the removal of trees. So that wasn't entirely the intent of the sustainability committee when the ordinance was pulled together. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board. The sustainability committee's worked for the past couple months to look at alternate language. And so what we've provided in your packet is the recommendation from the sustainability committee, which basically minimizes the amount of tree cutting for installation of solar arrays so that it's only what is necessary during the construction operation and maintenance of the solar array. Any cutting in excess of an acre would require a revegetation plan, both for any cleared areas as a result of construction. And then once the array is decommissioned, they would also have to revegetate the area as well. That would all be reviewed by the planning board as part of their approval process. And one of the caveats is that it needs to be developed by a qualified individual. They need to use native plants, needs to be planted in the same density as was there initially. They need to include a maintenance plan and things of that nature. One other smaller change that is in the document, we also removed the caveat about not using working agricultural lands. Really, what we were trying to get at is we don't want the quality soil to be stripped away as part of the installation of solar arrays. Solar arrays don't typically have long-term impacts on the landscape. So we really want to make sure that people aren't stripping away that quality soil, but that they could install a solar array. But when it's decommissioned, it could be removed and still be used for agricultural production. So that's kind of the nutshell, and happy to take questions or suggestions from the group.
Thanks very much for your concise review and all the work that you put into this, bringing it back again before us. So I turn to my fellow committee members and see if they'd like to have any questions answered. Go ahead, Jean Marie.
Yeah, I'm concerned about removal of mature trees and old growth. Like, for example, someone has 30 acres, but there's a lot of like old growth oak trees or pine or whatever. So, okay, so they can take it down the way this is written and revegetate, but it's gonna take 50 years or more to replace it. So I'm concerned about the trade-off there because trees are important to the environment also.
Right, and
So is there some way we can put something in here to protect old growth? Or did you discuss that in sustainability at all?
we did discuss it in sustainability. The piece that we have to keep coming back to, or that sustainability kept coming back to, is that these are private properties. This is the only ordinance or the only section of our zoning ordinance that restricts tree cutting. And so someone could, rather than install a solar
Right.
array, could build a subdivision.
Maybe we should
And
change certain ordinance. Well, anyway,
so, yeah, I completely agree. It's a matter of balancing
Right.
private property rights,
Right.
this type of development, and then recognizing that there are going to be environmental trade-offs
right,
to get this more desirable, energy production, as opposed to turning turning land into house lots or commercial development.
So our shoreland zones would restrict tree
Yes.
cutting
Yeah.
or any place within so close
Yes.
to a water body.
Absolutely,
that's right.
So this is, in theory, non-sensitive areas.
correct. Yeah, and the Sustainability Committee also did an analysis of the allowable properties for solar development. If you recall, we talked a bit as we were going through the approval process for this. And the council ultimately decided, this committee and the council decided that only parcels of a certain size should be applicable for solar development. So it's parcels within the industrial, light industrial, rural farming and manufactured housing that is greater than or equal to 25 acres.
Right.
When we went through and looked at those eligible properties, more than 40% of them were completely forested, and more than 3/4 were 60% or more forested.
Right.
So we're severely limiting where and who can develop solar based on the current language. And then the remaining 40 or so, or quarter or so of the eligible properties were constricted either from existing ordinance, such as shoreland zoning, or because of existing uses. One of the parcels that's outlined as, or allowed for development is our US Postal Distribution Center. They're not going to put in a large solar array there. So that's just one example of another restriction. So there aren't a whole lot of properties based on how the ordinance is currently written where solar could be installed.
I'm looking at the chart that's, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the chart that was provided of different properties, and I'm familiar sort of with some of these properties. Again, I'm concerned about deforestation. One Joshua Libero, that's on the farmland. That's my relatives.
So do we need a
They're
permit
under
today
a
to cut
restriction.
down trees
But anyway,
if it's not in a shoreland zone?
No.
So this is almost symbolic. So if you had any sophistication whatsoever, you cut down the trees and then come apply for your permit. It doesn't.
and that
it's not
happens
rocket
all the
science.
time with
It-
commercial
And
properties.
it's totally legal. No,
Can I ask a follow-up question about that?
Yeah.
So if that were to happen, if someone were to clear their lot for a solar array prior to submitting an application for a solar array, would they still have these requirements to revegetate that space after it's decommissioned?
No.
So by not compelling them or incentivizing them to circumvent these requirements, it's actually a better, there's more performance guarantees, I guess, in the end.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Okay.
Yes.
I mean, and thanks for asking that, because I mean, and I get that. Of course, part of me is, and I've been saying this for a while, maybe we should be looking at not allowing people to totally strip off lots. I mean, and you know me, I'm real big on private property rights, but there's a balance there too. Because you see them stripping off the trees, including into the buffer zones, and then they're required to replant or whatever because of the buffer zones. But that's a different topic from today, but I at least wanted to bring it forward. As a person, I am concerned about our rural part of town losing tree coverage to anything.
Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah.
replace mature trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway,
And
that's
I,
just my thing.
I will just share that this Sustainability Committee and Conservation Commission are both interested in looking at the possibility of developing a habitat alteration ordinance. So
Oh, yeah,
we're
okay.
dealing with more than just
Okay.
forests, but looking at other
Right,
critical habitats also and figuring
Okay.
out how we can minimize impact and development.
Okay, good. That makes me happy.
Are you aware of any research? So it's funny because you get two sides of the equation here. You get solar that's going to help prevent putting carbon or burning fossil fuels, but you get the trees that are going to take it up. Do we know what the balance is? So if you get 25 acres of trees,
Great.
how much carbon mitigation that is versus how much carbon you're saving by having solar panels
There
there?
have been studies done. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you do save, like, it's worth it to cut down the trees for the solar
Oh, okay.
generation.
There's a net benefit environmentally.
Yeah, in terms of carbon dioxide.
If you actually, I think that's what brought this whole discussion forward was one of the applicants and that hasn't been able to move their project through actually provided some of the statistics around carbon offsets with solar arrays. And I think that, I forget the exact numbers, but it was many, many, many times over offsetting with what the solar array would produce versus the tree growth and leaving it there.
Yeah.
And so I can certainly forward that. It was in a previous packet that spoke to those figures.
So any other questions on this? I mean, this has been a very helpful discussion. What's the sentiment of the committee in terms of next steps on this? Because
Where does it need to go? I mean, it
Well,
goes
that's
to
the-
council first, then planning board? or-
that's a good question. I would think it would normally come to the council next, but in this case, it seems though you've already vetted this with, obviously with sustainability, but also conservation. You know, I know they weighed in, you know, newly merged committee. But is there any, is there anything else we should do with this in terms of vetting it, or do you think it's ready to come to the council and then possibly a loop through planning? What's
Does this
the,
have to go to planning? Do you know?
I don't know if, I don't know what the, I don't know if Jamie, you're familiar or not with the
I
process. I'm not.
assumed that it would go through the planning board.
So go to council, then be referred to planning board for public
That's my
hearing and brought back
guess,
just
yeah.
like we did for the last land use ordinance we had last
Okay.
night. Yep.
I'm assuming this is in 405. Yeah, it's 405. Okay.
Can I make a motion?
sure.
I move that this goes to the town council for first reading and beginning of the process.
Okay,
Second.
all right. Discussion. I'd like to see if there's any, there's one other question I forgot to ask you, and that was when you develop these suggestions on reforestation and revegetation, that sort of thing, where did you go in terms of resources to come up with those ideas?
This actually was largely based on Augusta's ordinance.
Okay,
It was really comprehensive in terms of land clearing and erosion control, and the reforestation and preserving the agricultural lands and topsoil.
Okay.
So that seems like the best example that would be applicable to Scarborough.
okay. So I think on this one, it's going to be important for us to make sure we have a full and fair discussion about all of the considerations to make sure we haven't missed anything. And if there is other expert input and testimony, that sort of thing, it'd be helpful. We should obtain that along the way, but hopefully someone else will think.
Oh, yeah, I
of bringing
think at
that
the
up.
on the council
Yeah.
level. and planning board.
But I'm okay to vote on this then.
Sure. Counselor Katarina,
Yes,
Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel.
Yes,
that was easy.
great. Thanks a
you.
lot.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate your good work. Thank you, Jamie. Okay. The second agenda item is creating a separate engineering and technical department. So I'd like to give this, Liam, why don't you kind of lead off on this one and then I'll kind of filigree from there. So go ahead.
Sure. So the next agenda item is a proposed change to the administrative code. The administrative code for those is essentially the administrative incorporation of the town. So it speaks to what town departments are established, who supervises those departments. I think the council, I think everyone in the committee was on council when we established a few years ago what we call the technical division within the planning department. It was overseen by our town engineer and supervised, brought GIS underneath this division, as well as sustainability. Previously, sustainability was, I think, reported to the assistant town manager. The sustainability coordinator was originally incorporated and sort of had de facto supervision from 3 or 4 other department heads. And so it's just very disjointed. So this was kind of a move to consolidate what we really considered kind of internal technical resources and expertise under one umbrella. This division has grown, grew actually last year with the addition of an engineering technician position. So now there's a kind of a core group of 4. And it's really an evolution of that division into what we really think should be a standalone department. This is headed up by our town engineer, who acts and serves effectively as a department head. I think it's partly recognition of that position. And I think it just makes sense. It doesn't really belong in planning any longer. And so that's what this change to the administrative code would allow for. So just going through the actual document, it does, you'll see in the table of contents, it does add this as a Department of Engineering and Technical Services. And then the other edits you'll see with the administrative code is effectively removing town engineer underneath the planning department. So you'll see some strike through language, adding it as a department head and department. Bear with me as I find these changes. Oh, so you'll see, again, a modification to the Department of Public Works. And then you'll see all new language around this Department of Engineering and Technical Services.
So with this, I'd like to kind of ask a couple of threshold questions. Liam and I had a chance to put the HR hats on a little bit to talk about some questions, including span of control and that sort of thing. So maybe if you could run through those for a minute, and then we'll come back around again. Because normally there's a cry from out of the West whenever there's talk about creating another department, that it's empire building, and then all of a sudden we're going to have huge spikes in SG&A, and so we went through the exercise.
Yeah, fair enough.
Exercise a little bit.
Yeah, administrative creep. So this change is really it's an administrative change in that there's no new positions being created or requested. There's no additional funds required. There's no changes in salaries related to this change. It's really, again, and it's not, to me, it's not dissimilar from, as you saw other functions grow and develop. The assessing department, assessor used to be a component squarely of the finance department. And I think there's still pieces that we need to clean up there. But that is just to assuage any concerns around, is this the start of a new empire? It's not. I think that we always around budget time try to forecast where we may see some growth of staff. This isn't a division at this point that we see any growth in staff. Again, it does have 2 of our newer positions in it. So there's no financial implications to this change related to this administrative change.
And as a rule of thumb, I mean, generally I'm in favor of having sort of broad spans of control and flat organizations rather than big hierarchy and levels. So this does kind of move along those lines, but it's a pretty broad span for Tom. I mean, I don't know what makes him, it gives him a couple dozen direct reports, right? I mean, it's pretty.
Yeah, Tom at this point has every department head reports to him, including the assessor and the clerk, as well as some additional administrative staff. I think Tom has at this point probably 15-ish direct reports on paper.
I'm not trying to,
Plus a couple counselors.
I'm not trying.
I'm not sure that's how the hierarchy works, but I have noted.
Yeah, I'm trying not to tee this up for Tom to spike it in terms of adding a head of administration or a COO or whatever. But I think there are good reasons for it. I think also if you go into detail and you look at the parts of engineering and tech services, there's a lot on stormwater. There's a lot on pretty complicated things like traffic management plans and other things like that require an enormous amount of time and effort and work hours. So this makes sense to me. But I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee and any other questions, comments you might have.
I'm fine with it. I mean, it makes sense to me. This isn't something that I'm gonna lose sleep over anyway, but this type of thing. I feel, if the town manager and the various supervisors feel that this would make sense for them and create greater efficiencies in what we do, then let's go for it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me as well. These things move over time. And right now, given that we're losing or we lost Jay, it'll probably make that position a little bit easier to fill, understanding that you're carving out the technical
Right.
roles.
That's true.
And technical roles are different. But I think there's good reason, rationale anyways to separate them. So
Great,
I'm supportive.
great.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Just,
mean-
I guess I just would like to take the public opportunity to really commend the efforts of Angela Blanchett, who's the town engineer. Angela's been with us now. I probably should know this, but certainly longer than I have, 6, 7, 8 years. And I don't know where we'd be without her. She's a phenomenal employee. She works harder than anyone I know. And she really is a phenomenal leader with a great team. So I think that this is some great recognition for her as well.
Great.
Great. So with that, I welcome a motion on this agenda
So
item.
moved.
Second.
Oh, I'll move. I should make a motion on move that this goes to ordinance. I mean, to council. Thank you.
I'll second the
makes
motion
sense.
to move this forward to council.
Okay,
Thank you.
Great. Counselor Katerina,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel.
yes,
Great. Thank you.
thank you. So if there aren't any other agenda items, I had one other thing on here that's pretty loosey-goosey one, and that is, and it's not even properly worded on the agenda, but in this emerging world of housing, with affordability, availability, and homelessness issues somehow, in that little diagram. I was asking the question, does it make sense for us to try to suggest perhaps some ordinance or suggest to the council that there might be a group organized to study this in more detail? I know we have separate efforts that are kind of going at it from different angles. We've asked for input from the Housing Alliance. I know John's been thinking a lot about it and providing us with leadership on how we're dealing with the matter of of our hotel, our hotels and the way that they've been basically serving as temporary shelters in some respects. So is this something that, is an ordinance matter for us to worry about, or, is there anything that we could offer or suggest from ordinance that might help this get organized, or is that something that ought to take shape and move forward in another way? So but
I would be interested in knowing, I know GP Cog has been doing some work over time on this, because the concern was that everything's concentrated in the city of Portland. And so of course, the city of Portland's like, why don't you guys take your fair share, so to speak? So I'd be interested in knowing more about what came from that or what's going on with that. I think that I really like the idea, Counselor Hamel, that you're thinking, what should we or could we be doing about this issue for us as a town? Where it belongs, I think that's a good question, unless we had some ad hoc, I hate to say ad hoc committee or group or something that met, but I'd be interested in what other towns are doing too. I mean, instead of reinventing the wheel, if someone's already got something that makes sense, maybe we should look at what's going on. So I'm not sure where that belongs.
others?
So it's a really complicated issue.
Yeah.
A lot of GPCOG's advocacy has been towards getting state support for
Right.
funding.
Right,
And mostly for South Portland and for Portland.
right.
My understanding is that there's a steady stream of asylum seekers still
Yes.
coming and
Yes.
probably upticking a little bit, which that coupled with the pinch on housing, which has increased our homeless population as well. The situation is pretty dire.
Yes.
We've been sheltered from it in Scarborough for a long time.
Yeah.
We're not anymore. I mean, we're we're seeing people getting put out of, even if it's a hotel, getting put out of their residence on short notice and have no place else to go.
Right.
One thing that I'm looking at that may require an ordinance is, when you're using hotels for housing, those people right now do not have the same rights as somebody in an apartment
Right.
for eviction, for due process for an eviction. What seems to be happening is they're getting an email from Opportunity Alliance saying you got a week to go find someplace else. That can be challenging. So I'm looking at, well, can we make at least level the playing field
Right.
if it's for housing? And that would require either an ordinance change amendment or an emergency ordinance. In terms of getting into homeless shelters, though, that is a space that I have not gone deep on and do not
Right.
know. I've heard that it makes sense to do on a regional basis, but I really do not understand the space. Would need a lot of help to try to even think about doing something
Right.
there. And that's where maybe an ad hoc committee would come in. I don't know.
That's what, yeah, it's not, I think that we need more info. It's here, it's now, it's not just Portland anymore. I had an appointment in Portland on Wilmot Street, which is off from Cumberland Avenue last night. And this person that I know, it's has to do with art stuff. It's gotten worse and worse. And there's this huge encampment not too far from there. And it's sad because, these are people who, they're people, they're humans like you, me, and everyone else. But because of mental illness or substance abuse or whatever, it's an awful problem. Now, I'm not saying Scarborough should take on solving the whole thing, but what part should we or could we be playing in this, particularly since we do have these hotels that aren't full in the winter. So there could be an ongoing placement of people or programs. So, being proactive about it. And I sure as heck don't want to be like a neighboring town who shall remain unnamed, who's like, not in my backyard. And we'll put something special out, where the poor farm was in town years and years and years ago. But yeah. So I'd like to see us do something. And I'm thinking it may be an ad hoc committee of sorts where we collect the information and go from there.
So, yeah, I appreciate the comments so far on this, and it's clear that the symptoms of this being a problem are presenting themselves, and we've yet to really diagnose deeply the causes, and to try to dig to find out, where to begin at the root cause. And there's more than one. So, but keep coming back to the need for us to do something, but to try to make sure that it's going to be, A, effective, and B, within our authority, and C,
Right.
hopefully not make a bigger problem.
Right.
So, anyway, this is just kind of a starting point. I don't know if there's anything that we want to do formally, but it does seem that there are a handful of people there's a handful of agencies that are,
Yes.
involved with this opportunity. We've talked about Opportunity Alliance, GP Cogs, Maine Housing
Rebel
Authority, other municipal housing authorities
Right.
as they exist town to town, Portland Housing Authority, South Portland, so forth. And then you've got individuals that we know that are experts on this because of
Right.
their work. They include the health officer for Scarborough, Rich Candellan, right, who's our fire chief, our social services navigator crowd, and we're looking at adding to that group.
We have a resident, Josh Probisflo,
Right,
who
Josh.
does that for South Portland.
Right,
Yeah.
and
He lives
now
in
we
town.
developers have some experience
Right.
with this, Avesta and others who have worked on senior and low income. Cindy Taylor and others. So, and we mentioned Brian Shumway and the Housing Alliance. So,
Right.
I don't really have a resolution in mind, but is there suggestion for, what we might do next, kind of heading in that direction. Is it?
How do we get, if we wanted an ad hoc committee, what's the process for that?
So that's within our authority.
Okay,
It,
as the council.
Yeah, and it's outlined in chapter 302, and we've done it
Yep.
a number of times, so I
Yeah.
think I think that's something that we can certainly do. I guess what I'm curious would
Right.
be, does the Housing Alliance, so housing and homelessness are kind of two different things. Do we have any
We have
experience with it?
homelessness because of lack of housing.
Well, yes, so they're
and
related.
Services,
They're related.
right.
And yes, they're certainly complementary, but I'm wondering if we do have any experience in house in an existing committee, and I don't
The
know.
housing, the Affordable Housing Committee, yeah, you've got a couple folks on it who are, but this seems to me to be so specialized that it's almost like you gotta have, I hate to use the term study group, because that sounds like you're tossing something down the road and God only knows what or when it'll come out, but Liam, you got something to add to that? I can see your brain going. there, man.
Just to give some, because we touched on a number of things. I mean, I think the things that are kind of bringing this to a head, it's complicated and there's a lot of them. So right now, what we're seeing in Scarborough is kind of the effects of the emergency COVID shelter at the
Right.
Fairfield Inn and the emergency rental assistance program that's kind of unraveling now. Anecdotally speaking with some of the people who have participated in those programs who are chronically homeless, some are, I think there's probably a pretty good cross section, some that have been dealt an unfortunate hand. There's some people in that program who are gainfully employed, which I think some of the members on this council have heard a little bit more about those stories. There's some with mental health issues. There's some with substance use issues. To speak to the GP COG initiative, I was able to sit in on a meeting earlier this week with the Southern Maine managers to get an update on that initiative. That's really geared towards asylum seekers at this point, and they're really looking at transitional housing. So when they arrive in the state, there's this period of time when they don't have work status. They can't find housing. So what do you do? And that's sort of a 6 to 18 month window. And they're kind of looking at a regional effort to establish kind of a campus-based, or at least that's what they're exploring.
Right.
That got some mixed feedback from the people on the call, simply because, when you're talking about centralizing some of those things, there are other impacts, right? Schools, if they're school-aged
Right.
children, things like that. And so that's an initiative going on. I think clearly the pandemic and now what's going on with the economy around inflation, cost of living, cost of housing. I agree to your point that there's a lack of affordable housing, but that's really the longer term. Right now, we really are dealing with a crisis of where's someone going to have a roof over their head tonight, right? So I think it is complicated. I think that there probably is value to understanding what can be done in the short term. I think that with people who are far more knowledgeable than I think there's a real lack of answers there, or solutions, or even ideas as to what to do. It's kind of, when they're getting pushed out of their temporary locations at the hotels and motels who have participated in this program, they're either finding another municipality, they're applying for general assistance to see what assistance can provide there, but that's woefully insufficient. They're finding a friend or relative to stay with, or they're moving into an encampment. That's kind of what's happening. And so I think that there's some certainly what Scarborough can do is I certainly think getting a better handle on the immediate crisis. I think that looking at pulling together, I think there should be a lot of interest I would like to hope that there would be some state or regional, i.e. county, efforts to find some solutions to these things on a larger scale. I mean, really, Scarborough's not going to, in the next 6 weeks, build a homeless shelter, build transitional housing, and build affordable housing. And even then, enough to satisfy all the need, probably not. So I think that there does need to be some regional efforts there. And there's a lot of different groups and organizations trying to chip away at some of these complex issues. And I think the reality is that we're not really succeeding. We have probably more people who, in talking with people who are homeless in Scarborough as to how they found themselves here. Again, it's a lot of people who came through the Fairfield or came through the ERA program. And what they've shared with people who are interacting with them is that Scarborough is a safe community. And they don't have to worry about their stuff getting stolen or getting harmed. And so they're not going anywhere, and they don't have anywhere to go. And so it's, I commend Councillor Hamel for even putting this on the agenda to have a discussion at this level. But I think that there needs to be, I think, some more regional coordination and leadership at the state level to solve these systemic pervasive issues. And it's sort of, it's a nice concluding statement, doesn't get us any farther down the
I was
line.
gonna say, that's
Yeah.
sort of like kicking the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any harm in us having some sort of an ad hoc committee? Because it's gotta start somewhere. And even if
I
we were the
agree.
municipality who started rattling the cages, so
right.
to speak.
I think certainly understanding,
Right.
understanding
Right.
all of these impacts, forces, what's going on. I think understanding the situation as it pertains to Scarborough, I
Right.
think there's value to understanding that.
Right.
Again, and because you can't solve a problem without
No.
understanding it first, right?
Right.
On some level. And so do I think there's value to getting some, sure, especially because it is relatively,
Yeah,
homelessness isn't new to Scarborough, but how visible it is appears to be.
It seems to me there's two pieces that we're really not getting at it, and it's because I believe that the individuals that are struggling with breaking out of being homeless have serious deep-seated problems.
Oh, yeah.
They're dependency related, or they seem to be mental health care related, or both.
Just some
Yeah.
are just normal people.
I
You
know.
can't find a place to
Yeah,
live.
yeah.
Yeah, they're working.
Yeah.
So, and I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing here about the asylum seekers and migrants and folks that are, have come here and have an ability to kind of work through that and to get to someplace else in terms of their housing, and also their, they're establishing a life here. So, so there you have it.
So, Mr. Hamel,
loosely defined.
what brought this? I
I-
know you
I've
listened
been-
to a podcast. At
No,
something
well,
that
I
kind of-
listened, I was in the car for many hours and I
Right.
listened to a podcast, and we'll just set the politics aside, but
Right,
it's a guy, Schellenberger, I think is his name. He
Yeah.
ran for governor in California as a progressive, and he's, moving rightward, but he wrote a book called San Francisco, which really went very deep on the issue in a big city of homelessness, and particularly the drug and dependency aspects of that. And they did a lot of research in other areas of the world where this has been a historic problem for decades. Amsterdam,
centuries.
Lisbon, Portugal, some other places like that. And his whole point was you really need to provide shelter, but then you need to provide a path from shelter, from
Right.
emergency shelter, to some
Right.
stability with your life and commitment in order to obtain housing, which really should be on the basis of some
Right.
sort of contract, some sort of, agreement to
Maslow-
stay clean, or
Right.
to get out of-
Maslow's hierarchy
Yeah,
of needs.
Yeah, so, and that actually, led to some success. Otherwise, what was happening is you're creating just bigger and bigger places where there's more and more crime, and people had a very hard time breaking out of
Hmm.
that. So, and I haven't read the book yet. Listen to the podcast, it's not the same as reading the book, so.
And I brought it up because Dawn, when he came back from this trip he'd been on, mentioned it to me, and I had a great discussion about, the upside down side, and, but to me, I don't see anything wrong with us looking at it as how does it affect Scarborough, or what's going on in Scarborough. And frankly, now that my time is more free than I expected, which is fine, there's a reason for everything. I would be willing to work with someone to take the lead on that. I mean, because that's my big thing. I deal with it daily in my business. And I, have family members who've been affected by it. I don't know too many people who haven't in one way or another. And it is front of mind, and I am concerned about, if we've got a recession coming and whatever, this isn't gonna get better. We've gone from a pandemic now we may be heading into a recession or whatever, so why not at least look at it and see what the effects are on this town and what, if anything, we can be doing. If nothing else, advocating as a municipality, saying, whoa, it's not just Portland, it's not just South Portland, Scarborough, you know, we want you to understand too. So anyway.
So when we've done this in the past, there's been a written statement, you know, in terms of not a mission statement so much as a
Charge.
chart. There you go. Thank you. A committee charge. Tom Hall's really good with writing these.
Yeah,
Is there enough there? Is there enough raw material to try to craft that, or is this not far enough along yet? This is the question. So.
gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we could talk a little bit about what's happening in Scarborough a little more. So,
Yeah.
because it's not so much recession driven. This
No,
is a
not yet.
demand based
Yeah,
issue. Portland's extremely popular. It's one of the top 10 cities in the country. We're
Right.
right next door. And they've been passing different measures that seem good on the surface, but we're seeing they're actually resulting in disruption
right.
and dislocation. Those people are, who were just scraping by, but had a place to live, now don't. And other people came in and took their spot and they're paying top dollar for it.
I was gonna say, now they're paying 3 times. what
Yeah,
they
so
paid
those people that
before.
were
Yeah.
scraping by are now out on the street and so the opportunity to get back in is extremely challenging. So they're being put up in hotels
Right.
through emergency rental assistance.
Right.
I don't know how you unwind that
No,
that
and
spiral
we're
that
not-
we're
and
in
we're
right
not-
now.
And we're not looking to answer those. I mean,
Yeah.
God love us, we did.
Well, I'd
We
love
could
to
make-
answer that.
It would be awesome to
that
answer
question.
it, but what's the impact on Scarborough and what should we or not be doing? I mean, what's our part in this? As far as, because we are ending up with the end result, which are people living in, I've got people
We have people
living at
homeless
the
here.
end of my lot in the woods from time to time. I have a wooded area and I know, because I'll walk back there occasionally and someone I know has been there. They've been in camping or whatever. It's like, God love them, but
I think there's probably value to a committee that will help understand, first understand
Yeah.
what's going on as it relates and impacts Scarborough. And from there, perhaps that becomes proposing solutions, either here in Scarborough, or become part of a regional effort. The other thing I will just note is that Lauren Dembski Martin has been pulling together a group of stakeholders, including the library, community services, Project Grace. I believe that Cumberland County's botched the title, but health manager has participated in sort of roundtables to kind of
Right.
compare notes on what we're seeing in Scarborough. So that's happening at a staff level.
yeah.
But no, I think that there is value, because I think, again, it appears that this is a new phenomenon here in Scarborough. And I think there's a real desire and a real value for the community to understand some of these things. And so if that's part of the charge of this committee, and get an idea of the longer term solutions, there's probably quite a lot of value there.
So John, does it make sense for you as chair to smile at Tom and?
Yeah, I think so.
Hey,
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you want to be involved in the
Yeah, I'd be
So why don't we
conversation.
do
happy to
that?
do
So
that.
I don't think
Okay.
it requires a formal motion, but I think we should do that in the least and start seeing if we can't
That's- yeah,
tease out
that's
where
fine.
to,
Yeah.
where to begin.
Okay.
And I know the byline won't be done. Hamilton thinks we should build shelters in Scarborough,
Someone may interpret it that
so,
way, but people interpret things.
But I have heard people suggesting different ideas for what we might do with Alger Hall and other town properties. So, but that's not the headline. The headline would be to try to learn more and to
Yes.
figure out what's the
Yeah.
starting point. So
Yeah.
in terms of defining the problem. So
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Yeah, so John and I will
Yeah.
meet with Tom.
Great.
Let's do it there and see what we can do.
And I'm engaged enough with GP cog and other resources that
Right.
we can chase some of them down and see,
Yeah.
maybe there's something we can learn from.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
used to be on GP cog and I haven't been for a while. I know of course, Paul's with GP
Yeah.
cog now, so anyway.
Okay then. Thanks for taking time out for
Yeah,
the
no.
discussion.
Yeah.
And the only other item is suggestions for agenda items for the next meeting. I think we'll have
We have
the
coming down the
manufactured
pike.
homes coming back.
Well, how many times have we been through manufactured homes?
It may not come back. It depends upon whether or not Tom's able to work
I was
out.
gonna say, yeah.
So, but that's the only one that I could think of that may be a possible agenda item for the next ordinance committee meeting. But we got a couple of things that are on the list.
So I'll throw one out. It's on our goals for the year, but I don't know if Jay's departure kind of throws a wrench in it, but impact fees.
Oh,
was one of our,
yes, yes. We need
charges.
to look at those, yeah.
And I don't know where, I know most of that was going to be driven by staff,
Right.
and I just have no idea where we're at. but
Okay,
Okay, that's it. We need to,
It's a goal, it's still,
Alright.
it's important. anyway,
Yes,
but We might want
yeah.
to,
so impact
Reinvigorate that.
fees, maybe we'll have something to report back on what we just talked about in
Yeah.
terms of.
when is our next meeting? It's
It'd be next,
July
it'd be the July
23rd,
meeting, same third
June, July. Where are
third
we?
Thursday. Anything else that maybe idling that we set aside?
July
we all-
21st?
We did set aside, or we did talk about the onset of the year, small scale agriculture, farm stands.
Oh, right.
Right,
And so those things I think are interconnected on some level. So we did talk about that.
that came up with the special amusement permits item again. kind of
Okay.
Tangentially.
And then we also do, I mean, marijuana does need to come back one more time for cleaning up some of the requirements. I didn't put it on this agenda because I don't want to have another discussion. I want red line changes for the committee to consider and react to.
Okay.
So
Okay,
again, always aspirationally have that on the agenda for the 21st.
so we'll work with those, we won't hold ourselves prisoner to them, but we'll work with those and see what else presents itself.
Okay.
in the interim.
And I think public comment would be the last thing on the agenda.
Yes.
Great. We might rename public comment, Allison Bristol's segment here.
The Allison Bristol 10-minute blog. I'm Allison Bristol. I live at 6 Bayview Avenue, and I came to comment on the revisit on the utility scale solar in that it's disappointing to see it back, and it's disappointing to see that the parameters are going to be loosened. I would agree with Counselor Katerina that one of the big concern is the deforestation and the time it takes to replace matured trees. With Jamie's comment, a couple of things with Jamie's comment, if we're looking at Augusta as a model on how to do this, we should also look at surrounding communities that only allow this in industrial and light industrial zones. Cape Elizabeth has it on a landfill. I think South Portland has it by the airport. I think Portland has it on a landfill. And a landfill is the perfect place to have solar farms because you can't use the land for anything else. So it's useful. It brings revenue into the town. But the way that the ordinance is written now, it's allowed in, even though it's rural farmland zoned, it's basically residential neighborhoods. And I also wanted to comment on the shoreland tree, which is a very valid point. Of the list of properties that are eligible just by saying the overlay is properties that are only 25 acres or greater. 7 of those are over in what I call the Spurwink Road, Black Point, 3 on Black Point Road, 3 on Spurwink Road, 1 on Marion Jordan Road. I'm guessing Marion Jordan might be in the shoreland, but there's nothing in the language here that qualifies it, that it can't be in shoreland. So, I would ask the ordinance committee, although you've already, pushed it up to council, then the council would consider a real overlay, not just based on acreage, but where these might be most appropriate to site. And the other pitch I make often is to rezone the area that's around Spurwink Road and Black Point, because this is what we come up against with marijuana, with utility scale. Now we have the contract zone with Piper Shores, which is great. And, there's public benefit to that. There really isn't, I don't see public benefit to these changes, in that these solar farms are really commercial power plants. And there's no direct public benefit to Scarborough the way there is with putting a solar farm in a landfill. It's an agreement between a property owner and probably an out-of-state alternate energy company to lease land. It's a very lucrative lease deal for the property owner, but it's all great that it's, helps in conservation, but there really is no direct impact to the citizens of Scarborough except losing trees and having a solar farm, in a residential area. So I hope when it gets to council, these are some of the things that you might consider. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other
Is there
comments?
anyone online?
Anyone else? Anybody online? You could raise your hand if you are. Okay, guess not. So with that, I'll be happy to entertain a motion to shut this thing down.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Okay,
Counselor Katerina,
Yes,
Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
yes,
we are adjourned.
thank you.
meeting adjourned. Thanks.
You didn't ask me.
Allison, what zone do you want to move this into?
What's that?
What